Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Heather Denniston, and this is the Junk You Should Know Show. We are here every Friday at noon PST, and today I am delighted to introduce Dr. Stephen Hall to you. Welcome, Stephen.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You're welcome. We are going to be talking about how we can be using our life experiences to heal, and we're going to get into a great conversation. First, I want to do a quick thank you to our sponsor, The Change Cave. The Change Cave is a 12-module online learning institute geared toward upping our wellness aspirations and our wellness foundation. It's 12 modules of fantastic content. It's weekly newscasts, monthly mindset, and a very fierce interactive group of wellness warriors. So if you are interested in that at all, there will be a link in the comments below. But let's get to our interview, Dr. Stephen. I appreciate you taking time for us today. I know everyone is going to be very, very excited about this content. You have already in just our pre-show discussions and our talk about doing this show, I've already learned a lot. So I'm very excited about this. So can you tell me just a little bit about your background? You're a medical doctor by trade, but you have a unique approach. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Well, early on in my career, I got interested in helping people that conventional medicine didn't really have any good answers for. And unfortunately, that turned out to be a lot of people. And I figured, well, there's got to be a way to help these people. And so I started searching all over for, other healing traditions and ideas that they might have. And so I've studied a wide variety of different things, starting with nutrition, herbs, homeopathy. I looked into Chinese medicine, of course, body work, chiropractic. I've studied osteopathy. And then, how does your mind work? I've taken a lot of training in therapy and hypnosis, clinical hypnosis, not the Showtime hypnosis. and just, but really listening to my patients over the years and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And then I try to look into, well, why? Why didn't this work? And why did this work? And I started thinking along the lines like, so symptoms are a clue that healing needs to happen. And so when the symptoms resolve, that's a clue the healing has happened. It's not the healing itself. And I think that's a big confusion we have in our society. And even just asking the question, what is healing? I've found that most of us want to be healthy, but very few of us have ever really thought very deeply about, well, what does that really mean and how do we do it?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And so then our actions to try to get healthy are kind of haphazard. There's like no plan. There's no overarching strategy, for example, because we don't really know what health is. So I started looking at my patients as well. So if the symptoms resolving or a clue healing has happened, what else has changed in my patients besides their disease resolving or whatever? And what I noticed early on is that they had all learned something. And they'd often learned more about who they really are. They've learned about how to stand up for themselves or how to stay in their personal power, how to not just listen to their body, but also listen to their whole life, the information coming to them from their life. And I thought to myself, well, what if that learning is the healing? And so I came up with the definition that healing is a process of finding out who you really are deep inside, and then living in a way that's consistent with that fits who you really are, making choices that fit. And that definition, that approach to healing has held up really well in my practice. So
yeah, you and I know that I've sent you some of my toughest cases, and the success rate and the satisfaction with the care received has just been unbelievable because you approach it from such a different vantage point. And, as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, you're welcome. And as you were talking, I was thinking about that idea of having learned something. And I kind of was thinking, oh yeah, every time that I've gone through some kind of what I'll say healing crisis, it has everything to do with learning more about myself and
Exactly.
and growing from there. And so I think that's such a powerful starting point for us. Now, the title today is How to Use Our Experiences to Heal. And we pre-show talked a little bit about tangible versus intangible, and I'm still learning about this. So can you share, you take the healing a step further beyond just this definition that you've given that's so fabulous and break it into tangible and intangible. Can you share what that means?
Yeah. So a saying I like is that, you're constantly showing yourself who you are. You just have to pay attention.
Mm.
And so that and so you can basically learn from every experience that you have. And so every experience that you go through during your day holds the potential to help you deepen your understanding of yourself.
Oh, that's
Right?
powerful. Can you just say
Yeah.
that again? Every experience we have during our day
Holds the potential for you to deepen your understanding of yourself.
Yeah,
So,
absolute truth. Yeah.
and so we can learn from all of our experiences. So what I do is I break our experiences down into two main camps. So one aspect of our experiences I call tangible, and those are experiences that we can literally weigh and measure. So, for example, I can do your blood chemistries. I can do EKGs, EEGs. I can do total body CT scans. So those are all things we can measure. Those are tangible experiences that you're having.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, and so conventional medicine likes to really look at these tangible experiences, right? But there's also the intangible experiences, and those turn out to actually be more important as far as they're what make us human. So some examples of intangible experiences are what you love, or what inspires you, or what's really meaningful to you.
Mm.
And what's interesting as humans, it's like we're just driven to find meaning. We have to understand and find meaning. But what's also interesting is science can't ever comment on meaning. That doesn't. So that's an intangible. See, and so I look at the tangible aspects of our experience are basically governed by what we call the laws of nature. And science is striving to understand the laws of nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a good example, probably everybody who's heard this law of nature, is E equals MC squared.
Mm.
That's a law of nature. Well, it turns out that the world's wisdom traditions, or the world's great religions, for example, have been striving to understand the laws that govern the intangible aspects of our life.
Mm.
And so I call those the laws of consciousness. So since all of our experiences in fact impact our life, we need a system of medicine that can take the laws of nature into account and the laws of consciousness into account, and put them together.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm striving to do in my practice.
That's super powerful. So just for clarification, the laws of consciousness, what would be examples of that for folks that this is sort of a new word to get their head wrapped around? What kinds of things embody the law of consciousness or laws of consciousness?
Well, I mean, probably the best example that most people in this country know is in our Declaration of Independence. They stated a law of consciousness. And so they said, you remember, we hold these truths to be self-evident, which means we don't have to go in the laboratory and prove these truths, right?
Yeah.
And then they said that they wrote all men, I substitute all people. All people are created equal.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, you just know in your heart that that's true on some level.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You just know. So it is a self-evident truth. But yet, if you look at it on a physical level, how is it really true? I mean, we all have different physiques, different intellects, right? Different.
Yeah.
So on the physical, that's one of the aspects of laws of consciousness is they're usually not true on the physical level, in the tangible level. Like a good law of consciousness most people know is seek and ye shall find, right? That doesn't seem to work for odd socks. But But you,
True that.
right? But you know that, and like another way it's said in the Taoist tradition is the masters love the Tao because if the student seeks it, the student finds it. So it's like if you seek your knowing, if you seek who you really are, you will find it. It's not a maybe. See, so that's another law of consciousness. But back to the, a characteristic of law of consciousness is it's not always true on the physical level. And if you break a law of nature, something breaks, like the beam breaks or you slide off the road because you took the curve too fast. But if you break a law of consciousness, what happens is human suffering increases, right? So how it is we're all equal is all of our lives are of equal value, right? We're all equal in the eyes of God. We should all be equal under the law. And when we're not treated equally under the law, or when we're not treated as if all our lives are of equal value, then people suffer, right? So that's another kind of clue. And so when we break the laws of consciousness in our healing, then we continue to suffer because we don't find our healing.
Yeah.
See?
So bringing that down on a personal, I mean, that are some great illustration of laws of consciousness. If I'm thinking about myself and I am sick in some way, what types of things do I need to be looking at from a consciousness perspective to facilitate this prospect of healing?
Okay, so if you're sick, that means your body's generating some kind of symptoms, like say back pain or a headache or something, right? And so you can look at those symptoms as body language. Your body's trying to communicate something to you. So as symptoms, a clue something somewhere in the system of who you are is out of balance, right? And so you can listen. So body language is just like English in that it's simultaneously literal and symbolic, right? So if you read a poem on the literal level, how much of the meaning of the poem do you miss?
Right.
Or if you interpret mythology just on the literal level, right? So your body language can be interpreted literally. Oh, your back hurts, there's pain there. But it can also be interpreted symbolically, which is a little, symbolism is not, you can't pin it down quite as readily. So it's different things for different people. But one of the people that's written down the symbolism of body language as well as any place I've seen is Louise Hay. When she wrote You Can Heal Your Life, right? And she wrote down, so for example, she wrote that low back pain often symbolizes issues around support, financial support, or how are you being supported in your life? And, and sinus infections are often symbolize that you need to say something to somebody, but it's not really safe to say it to them because they have some kind of power over you.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's gone down like hundreds of symptoms and written down. And what I found is that's pretty accurate. Because you can also, another way to get to the symbolism is what feeling does that generate in you? So when you're having your headache, you're having the physical pain, but there's also an emotional response to that headache. What is that? And that will help you get to the symbolic aspect of your body language. So to put them both together, you want to look at, okay, well, my back's hurting because I've got arthritis in the facet joint and I've got muscle spasms around it, or the nerve is getting pinched or whatever. But that's not just happening to me in a vacuum. See, there's meaning in it for me. And it's usually asking for some kind of change in my life. Right. And your whole practice has been around that kind of thing. And like, what kind of changes have you seen as people have gone from having chronic back pain in their life to not having back pain very often?
Yeah, that's so true. And I think the biggest thing is that many of us are not asking ourselves the question. I love what you just said about headache. There's pain there, but there's also an emotion tied to it. Are you angry about it? Are you sad? Are you, what is that? And that's your first step into digging deeper. And I think often the pain is screaming so loudly, it's not our first natural instinct to kind of dig deeper and go, but what am I feeling about it, right?
Right.
And so I think that's so great to call on us to make sure that we're asking the right questions when symptoms are coming up in our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to just stop for a moment and say, okay, body, you're talking to me. I'm here. I'm listening. I want to help. And what's interesting is your inner wisdom can give you the body language in English or whatever your primary language is. So you can say, okay, I've got this headache. I feel the pain. Can you just give it to me in English?
Yeah.
And then you get still and see what pops into your mind. So first impressions often
yeah, and you said something very key there that many of us never experience, and that is stillness enough to hear and listen about what's going on. And so a big part of probably one of the primary steps of this whole process is looking for opportunities in your day and in your life to have stillness, meditation, quiet, so that you can listen deeply. And that's a big issue for many, many of us, isn't it?
Yeah. And one of the first things I usually have to do when a new patient comes in to the office is help them stop the war they're having with themselves.
Oh.
Because usually they're hating their headache or they're fighting it, or and they've been trying to annihilate it, and the headache's fighting back, you know. And they just say, you know, to just point out, well, healing's not about war.
Yeah.
You know, nobody actually really wins a war. There's always casualties on both sides. And so can we stop for a moment and try to understand that maybe your body's actually got your best interest at heart, and this is just the only language it has to talk to you about it. And can you take a moment and just say, okay, calm down. If we were just going to have a discussion about this, okay, body, what would you tell me? What would you say? And that usually gets the door open for people.
Yeah, it's I went through that process for the first time when I was about 28, early into practice. I was having a lot of musculoskeletal issues from working on patients. And an acupuncturist sat me down and said, you are hating your body right now and you are saying horrible things to it, and that we need to start there. And she taught me a process of having that conversation with my body, and it was almost immediate. And in fact, I literally just experienced this with my sister. I took her through the process. She was in a moment of pain and connecting in a positive way, stopping the warring. That's so great where you talk about in war there's always casualties, and often our bodies are the ones left on the field. So
yeah, exactly.
Right. So it's such a powerful thing, and I think the more we can connect with that, the less barriers and speed bumps and brick walls we're going to come up against during the process of healing, because we're always healing, in my opinion. We're always right. Even if it's in the subconscious level, things are going on. And so I think the more we can get in tune and be open to that. I love this conversation. This is fantastic. This is such great information. I'm learning. I'm sure all of you in the audience are learning. Let's talk a little bit more about how we can, some examples of how we might work on this in our own life. Are there certain things that we can be doing? We talked about meditation a little bit, but are there some other things that you coach patients on that will help facilitate this process?
You bet. So there's a few laws of consciousness that are really important for healing. And one is to just understand that your consciousness, so as human beings, we're conscious beings. We have access to this consciousness. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is, hopefully. But your consciousness is what makes you a creative being. And we're not just creative in that we can create art or we can solve problems, but we're actually creating our life each moment as it's unfolding.
Amen.
And so your creativity flows where you focus your attention. And so whatever you're focusing on, you're actually creating. And that's a law of consciousness that gets really ignored in a lot of self-help techniques, because the second you start with the idea that there's something wrong with me that needs to get fixed, you've already focused your consciousness on what's wrong with you. And then you're going to inadvertently keep creating that. And it turns out too that repression and denial are forms of attention. So whatever you're repressing or denying, you're also creating. And that's the root of that saying, what you resist persists.
Ah.
Because the very act of resisting something creates it. And most of my patients have experienced this, where they see an aspect of themselves that they want to change, and they try to force that part to change. And what do you bet usually happens?
Well, resistance, probably, in many ways.
Yeah. And it fights back, and then they have to try harder, and then it fights back harder. And it's literally an arms race starts developing inside as you're trying to force yourself to change. But it's because you're inadvertently creating more of it by focusing on it and trying to force it to change. So how do we get around that? Because that's kind of a catch-22. I mean, how do you change something without focusing on it, right? And then there's another law of consciousness that comes in that says, you shall know your truth, and your truth shall set you free. Right. So if you want to be free of a particular imbalance or a particular malady in your life, you've got to work with the truth of it. Because the law isn't, you shall know your fantasy, and your fantasy shall set you free. That would be a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
But we don't let ourselves know our own truth, because as soon as we see something, we go, no, that can't be right, or no, I don't want that, or we start to, we either repress it, deny it, rationalize it, intellectualize it.
Story. Yeah.
Yeah. And as soon as we warp the truth out of shape, it can't set us free anymore, and we're stuck with it. So by combining those two laws, that your creativity flows where you focus your attention, and the other law is that you have to know your truth. Well, so what you do is you practice awareness of your truth. Sorry, this thing's not sticking in my ear.
No, that's fine. Mine follow too.
And your truth is whatever's going on for you right now. So your truth is, what's going on biochemically in your body, what's going on in the thoughts in your mind, what's going on with your feelings, how are people treating you, how's the environment affecting you. So there's a lot going on in the moment to practice awareness of. That's why it's such a practice. It takes a long time, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to practice awareness of what's going on in your personal moment, and then you have to admit the truth of it. And then what I do is I even go like this sometimes in my mind. I go, hands off. I'm not going to try to change that truth. But because I have free will and I can choose where I focus my attention, I'm going to consciously choose to turn off to the side of my present moment, and instead focus on being kind to myself, that's my present moment. See? And so what are you creating by focusing on being kind to yourself?
Tell me. I'm not sure.
More self-kindness.
More self. Right? I see. Because it's like neuroplasticity thing. It's, what you focus on amplifies.
Right.
Okay.
And so you have to admit your truth. So you're not repressing or denying anything. So you're not unconsciously keep creating your present moment, because there's things about your present moment you want to change, right?
Yeah.
So you have to admit the truth of your present moment, and then turn to the side and choose to have compassion for yourself that happens to be your present moment.
Yeah.
Well, then what happens is that kindness goes in, and then your next present moment is a little bit kinder than the previous one, because the present moment is continually unfolding, right?
Yeah.
And so then you see that present moment, you be kind to yourself, and then the next present moment's a little bit kinder than that one. And it's sort of like turning a battleship. Pretty soon, if you keep practicing kindness, your life is steaming off in a whole different direction than it was. But now, the changes are almost imperceptible as each moment.
I love this concept, but is there a point that you've seen with patients that can negate taking action? Like when action needs to happen, let's say I'm a workaholic and that's affecting my health, and I acknowledge that truth, that yes, in this moment I am way overcommitted. It's impacting my health hugely. Now I'm going to turn a little bit. I'm going to treat myself with kindness and compassion. But where does action fit in there? Like I've got to cut my schedule in half so that I can be healthier. Is that right? How does that work? Because I think about, like, I'm sort of an action person. That's just how I'm wired. But there's lots of folks that would that be an excuse not to move forward?
Well, anything can be used as an excuse, but it turns out it's not. Because so I wrote all this stuff down. I call them the 7 tools of healing, and the 7th tool is right action. Because we live in a world that does require that we get off the couch and actually do things once in a while, right? But the idea is that right action is based on right understanding, right? And so right action is defined by the action that's going to give the results that are in the highest interest of all sentient beings, for example. So what action can you take that's going to be the best for yourself and everybody that you know? That's right action. And so how did...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like that the right action, correct me if I'm wrong, follows the moments of shifting focus onto kindness and compassion away from how much you hate this moment at the moment, and then is followed by right action. Yes?
Right. Because generally action that's motivated by hatred, action that's motivated by anger, by fear, by most of these kinds of emotions, those actions usually cause further problems down the road. They're not usually the idea of right action, right? Yeah. But what if your action was motivated by compassion, which I think of as love in action? So compassion is actually an act. You're doing something when you're being compassionate, and you're helping love come down and actually manifest on the earthly plane. That's what you're doing. Yeah. And so what if your actions were informed by compassion? See? And also a deep understanding of who you really are and what fits you and what doesn't fit you. Yeah. So right understanding is actually arrived at by this practice of really seeing your truth, acknowledging your truth, being kind to yourself about your truth. And then it's like when you're in that space, you'll just know what to say to that child, or you'll just know what to cook for dinner, or you'll just know what to exercise your body's asking for right now.
Yeah, and I think like we've kind of been touching on is the idea of the more you practice that, the easier that message comes through.
Exactly.
The more you hear it, it becomes just much more obvious as to where you're being led.
Yeah, and so it kind of goes back to how your mind works, where the bulk of your mind is made up by the unconscious part. And it's really what, it's running your body, like all your biochemistry, your immune system, your digestion, all that stuff. But it also stores a lot of the beliefs that make up your worldview, is in the unconscious part. And it sort of, most of the programming of your unconscious mind happens in the first 7 years of your life, and which for most of us is kind of capricious, and there's a lot of stuff in there that maybe isn't ideal, right? So I think of the process of healing is you're basically getting your unconscious mind to get reprogrammed with what your heart knows. Imagine, or with what spirit knows. I mean, imagine if that could happen. Yeah. The knee-jerk responses become much more in alignment with who you really are, and with kindness and compassion and those sorts of things. So that's what that practice does. And it's a very real practice, but it also is not an easy practice, it turns out. Yeah. You've got to really watch yourself and make sure you're watching. And over time, as you become more and more aware of more and more aspects of your present moment, more and more things can heal. Yeah,
I love that. You're opening up a toolbox in many ways, which is so great. Dr. Hall, you mentioned the 7 tools. That is from a book that you authored. Can you tell me a little bit more about that book?
Yes. So part of my work, so you can guess early on when I was trying to study all these different healing traditions, pretty much got overwhelmed with too much information. I mean, just trying to keep up on conventional medicine is really challenging, let alone nutrition and alternative medicine and all that stuff. Yeah. So I got this idea, well, there's got to be a better way. I like simplifying things. And this idea that we all have our own deep inner wisdom, I thought, well, why don't we just help a person listen to their own deep inner wisdom, and it'll tell them what to do to change their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I started focusing on, well, how do I do that with people? And I found out I could do that pretty automatically through the cranial work. Since your inner wisdom's running your body, by paying attention to your body, you can get your foot in the door. And so over time, as I got people connected with their own inner wisdom and watched how their inner wisdom helped them heal their life, I saw a pattern to what it was doing. And that pattern was independent of where that person grew up, what culture they were from, what their primary language was, what their religious training was. It was independent. And so I think of it as all denominational, for example. But I wrote that pattern down. I call them the 7 tools. They're actually like 7 skills that you can practice. And a long time, I didn't want to talk to anybody about them. I wanted people to have their own direct experience of these tools. But what I found was some people had a really hard time connecting with their own knowing, because it's deep inside and it's hard to hear sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And so I found if I taught them the tools and they started practicing the tools, then it made it easier for them to hear their own inner knowing. And then it took off and became a self-learning process.
Which is just the best. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote this book. It's called The 7 Tools of Healing. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Awesome.
And it goes through all the things we just talked about in there. Right. And the other tools we haven't talked about yet. But
yeah.
I talked a little bit about the laws of consciousness in there, but not too much. But I did show examples of how to use them. And what I found is people learn these tools, and then whatever's going on in their life, they apply these tools to whatever's going on in their life, and the net result is their true authentic self kind of rises to the surface of their life.
Yeah.
Which, as we talked about earlier, is the definition of healing.
Yeah. That's so true.
And so that's why I call them the 7 tools of healing.
It's great.
Help you deep. And anything in your life, that any experience you have, you can apply these tools to. And if you do that, it will help you deepen your understanding of yourself.
I love
from that experience.
Yeah, and I'll make sure I put a link down below to the book directly to Amazon so that people can go ahead and get that, because that is a great segue from what we are talking about now, is to just jump right into that and start working through those healing tools. Now, before we wrap up for today, I know there's a couple things that maybe I've either forgot to ask or that you want to share with the viewers today. Yeah, can we get into any last minute things that you want to talk about? Because this has been a super powerful show and I've loved every minute. So is there anything else that we want to be talking about before we wrap up?
Well, I have to say that, so I've been in practice for over 33 years now, and I'd have to say I've only seen 2 things that really heal people. And one is surgery, of course, when they need it. But the other one is the practice of self-kindness. And I think that's what's healed most of my patients from chronic disease, and more than anything I've ever learned in medical school. And as you practice that self-kindness, your body will ask you to take care of it. It'll tell you what it needs in the way of supplements, in the way of therapies, in the way of exercise and food. And so I don't generally give people a diet. I say, well, ask your body what it wants to eat, and then try to give it that, and then tune in a half hour later and see how your body feels because you gave it that. And over time, people can really get good at listening, and keeping that balance. So I don't like big long lists of shoulds, because as you try to force yourself to follow that list of shoulds, you again start that inner tug of war going. And instead, if you can just learn to really listen and trust what you hear. So I would say that's what the biggest thing I say is keep practicing kindness towards yourself. It gets better with practice. And it's okay to be kind to yourself. It's not narcissistic. It's not hedonistic.
Good.
It's okay, because that kindness is actually meant for all of creation. And you're part of creation too. So don't leave yourself out of that kindness.
For sure. And I think that brings up a good point, because I'm so sorry. Can you hear that leaf blower in the back. It's
just a little bit,
loud.
not too bad.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. It brings up a point for me, and that is that there's many of us out there that came from not a loving home, came from a broken family, has lots of damage, and has a very difficult time speaking to themselves with kindness because they never learned it from anybody else. And so I do think too, this is a process, guys, and it can definitely take some time. And Dr. Stephen, would you say one of the things that when I'm feeling like I can't do it for myself, practicing doing it for others helps up the energy, and then I can turn it on myself. So practicing kindness toward other people kind of brings my energy up to the point that then I can practice kindness toward myself. And so have you found that to be true?
Yes, yes, and it definitely works both ways. But most people I've worked with do find it a lot easier to be kinder to other people.
Yeah.
And then they're their own harshest critic on the inside.
Yes.
And and I say, well, the trouble with that is we're all connected. Mm-hmm. And so if you're trying to help somebody, but you're hurting yourself in the process, you're still hurting the bigger system.
Yeah, that's great.
And so if you can help somebody in a way that's also loving to yourself, then that's loving to the whole system.
That's a key point for sure.
And then your compassion has a solid core to it. If you're being really cruel to yourself but kind to everybody else, your compassion's like a hollow facade in a way, and it doesn't have as much power to transform the world as when you're acting from a solid core of compassion.
I think that makes
any sense.
It totally does. And what came to mind is the busy mom of 3 very, very busy kids, and she does kindness to everyone and completely depletes herself and is hard on herself. Your point is that's not doing that's not good for the greater good, because the damage that she's doing to herself permeates. So
because the truth is, she's just as worthy of kindness and compassion and good care as her children are.
Yeah.
Because we're all equal, right?
Yeah.
So nobody's more, nobody's less. And so and this is an occupational hazard for moms. There's no question about that. And just caregivers in general, that they'll give until they're depleted. But what I learned early on is I can give to my patients and actually be rejuvenated by that, not depleted by it. So sometimes I come home from a long day at the office and I'm just really energized and pumped up and not worn out and depleted. So it is possible to be a really good caregiver and care for yourself too.
I think that's a good point of awareness too, is that if you are feeling completely depleted and burnt out at the end of the day and needing to reach for a cocktail or food or whatever, you're self-medicating a little bit, and it's
something's off.
Yeah, something's off, and it's worth that conscious reflection of where you're at, what's your body calling for, what do you need, how can you be kind to yourself. So that's great.
And it's okay to give yourself that. That's the really important thing.
Yeah.
It's okay. And just like I've worked with a number of people, like say the athlete, for example, a lot of athletes are trained to really drive themselves hard and push through the pain and all that kind of stuff. And what I've noticed over and over, when they shift that relationship with themselves to one of kind listening and taking their body's opinion into account, what they notice is their performance goes up and their injury rate goes down. And the same thing happens with executives. When they start taking better care of themselves, their performance actually goes up and their error rates go down, So it does pay off. And say that for moms all the time, that if you get all depleted and you're not there to take care of your kids, what are they going to do?
Exactly. That's good for nobody.
So it's okay to take care of yourself. I want to give you permission to do that.
Yes. Dr. Stephen and I give you all permission to take care of yourself and be kind and compassionate. Dr. Stephen, thank you so much for being here today. This was a tremendous show. It's we'll go into the archives as one of my most favorite interviews. Thank you so much. And I for sure will ask you back to the show another time. That would be just amazing. You have some just great wisdom and content to share with the viewers. And so, folks, again, Dr. Stephen's book will be listed down below, excuse me, and there'll be a link that you can get straight over to Amazon and purchase that, because it is wonderful. And every time I talk to you, I learn and I grow, and I'm sure my viewers do as well. So thank you for your contribution. I really appreciate it.
Well, likewise. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next Friday at noon PST.